Hansen, and I want to try to bring the conversation from the general down to the specific a little bit in one area which I think we can do better. Scott Horn, my question's for you, and I apologize because it's not an easy question. I don't mean it to be an unfriendly question in any way, but if you've used the bathroom at Teton Village or most of the Aspens or most of the Teton Pines anytime recently, after some aeration and some treatment, the liquids end up being injected into the aquifer, the solids end up being spread on the land. So all those nutrients that we essentially bring into the area for food and stuff for everybody to use, essentially stay in this area. This is the watershed of Fish Creek, and our recent research on Fish Creek shows that to have chlorophyll A 10 to 20 times background, 10 to 20 times what we find out in other tributaries. So in the wealthiest county, in the wealthiest country on earth, I gotta hope we can do better than that. And I wonder if you guys have given that some thought on how we can modernize sewage treatment, both in Teton Village and then, of course, down the watershed in the Aspens and Pines as well.
Yeah, I know that Fish Creek is an issue in the algae and everything that comes from that. There has been discussions, and I'm not going to kid you, I don't know those answers. Melissa's here with me from TVA, and maybe she's got some thoughts on it. But you know, on the mountain, we suffer from not, you know, a lot of the things up high on the mountain. We don't have the sewage. We have to compost it right there and bring it down. But when you're talking about the village itself, Aspens, I don't know, Melissa, do you have any thoughts on that as far as the sewage issues?
I'm not very well versed in
Okay.
it.
Yeah, I wish I could tell you more. I'm not really, I don't want to speak on something I'm not an expert in.
Questions, comments? Bill?
While you're up and they're asking these difficult questions, how come Mountain Resort's not a member of 1% for the planet? It's just,
The Teton.
no, they're a planet.
Yeah.
Well,
Tetons
the
are
Couloir restaurant is a member of 1% for the planet. And we decided on 1% for the planet because it gave us a little bit, we had direct control of where the contributions went versus 1% for the Tetons, which as a board decides where the money will go.
Correct.
So, but we've designated that restaurant, which is a pretty high revenue restaurant of ours, to be part of that.
but not the rest of the resort.
Not the entire resort, but that restaurant at this point.
Okay, any anticipation of any other businesses within the resort or the resort itself?
Well, I think we could expand it and move on to some other restaurants or some other operating centers. I think we started this 3 years ago, so maybe there's room for expansion of it.
And just to be clear, I think it's wonderful you guys remember 1% of the planet. They're our sister organization, and the fact that you're giving 1% of the revenue back is a great thing. And of course, it'd be even more great if you wanted to add other arms in the business as well. But no, it's what you're doing is a wonderful thing. And if anybody wants to know more about the differences between our sister organization, 1% of the planet, 1% of the Tetons, please feel free to ask me, or Bill Klein, my plant over there, who's one of my board members. Other questions, comments? Oh, right behind you, Bill.
I just have two questions, one for Scott and one for Jonathan. Scott, you're on the START board. I'd like to know when, if transportation and carbon footprint is so important in this valley, when is the START bus going to go to Moose and the airport? That seems like a no-brainer and could be done tomorrow.
Yeah, and part of the transportation plan, it's in there. It's really what year we're going to get it in. Part of that is a funding issue. Right now, we're kind of maxed out as far as buses and what we can do. And then also the airport is tricky because the times that you have to run it are not your normal route times, depending on flights, employees, etc. So, but it is being looked at, not only the airport, but the park as well.
Well, the question for Jonathan was, I recall one of your columns within the last couple of years basically making the case that tourism was not the biggest economic engine in this valley. It really was second homes and construction and that sort of thing. Is that, am I misremembering that, or is that something we should be aware of?
Tourism is incredibly important, but it's not as incredibly important as it once was. As the economy of Teton County, as it becomes easier and easier to do any kind of work from anywhere on the planet, more and more people are sort of having that moment of, my God, this is the place that I love. Why? And I can move here without taking a hit in my salary and getting a big boost in my quality of life. Why not do it? The problem is that we can get a decent gauge on tourism through existing measurement systems, taxable sales, park, skier days, and the like. We don't have an income tax in Wyoming. We don't have any sort of sales tax on professional services or the like. So those things are really hard to get a handle on. So it's clear that from the amount of income, those kinds of professions that are off the radar screen are increasingly important in Teton County. But if you're sitting in the post of an elected official and the government revenues are dependent on sales taxes, then it's much more important to be able to measure tourism because they're contributing directly to the coffers of the government and because there's an incentive you measure them. So that's the short answer.
I have a question for Jackson Hole. I read a book by Auden Schindler from Aspen Ski Co. He's their vice president for sustainability. And he said in his book, since the 60s, and that's Aspen, still Mass in Colorado, that their ski area has been truncated by 6 weeks since the 60s. And so I'm just wondering, what's it going to be like in 50 years, given where you see climate change, or I don't know, what is the future of Jackson Hole, if you look 50 years out in your mind?
Boy, it's a tough question. And if you look at, I'm sure you look at all the things that I read, and we're pretty fortunate in Jackson Hole in that, you know, really the experts say if you're above Interstate 80 and you're above 8,000 feet, you're sitting pretty good. So although our base area is at 6,300, a lot of our mountains above 8,000. So I think, you know, and I'll be honest with you, selfishly, as the environment gets more difficult and we see climate change, we're kind of in a unique situation to actually benefit in the short run from what's going on, because there's going to be a lot of other resorts that are going to be out of the ballgame long before we would. So I hope that answers your question. The other piece of it is you'll see more snowmaking at the Jackson Hole Mountain Resort because of what's going on. And the problem is that's kind of a vicious cycle in that the more snowmaking's, there's a lot of energy when you make snow. So as we make more snow to extend the winter, we're actually damaging the planet more. So it's a tough one. We are seeing more efficiencies in snowmaking. It's improving, but it's just something we're going to have to do in order to keep the season where it is.
We have time for one or two more questions.
For Scott again. Sorry.
So we can hear you.
Question for Scott and JJ Mark. I'd really like to see the mountain do some form of wildlife monitoring, particularly at night, because I've seen tracks that were more or less verified as Wolverine tracks under sublet lift. And there are a lot of smaller animals in addition to the occasional moose, occasional bear. But I think it would be very useful, particularly in light of climate change. What animals are still there and using wild animals? They're still using that mountain and that whole area that we need to be concerned about. And nature mapping and getting your guests involved in the nature mapping program that we have with the Jackson Hole Wildlife Foundation, that's one avenue.
Well, we're certainly, partners. We're on Forest Service land, and we're partners with them. And I think it's certainly something we can look at along with the Forest Service to see what wildlife is still out there on a regular basis.
Great.
Yeah. And I know you all want to hear about Len's electric bike, so we'll hear about that.
We have one more question? Going once, going twice? Great. One of the reasons that I have hope that we can deal with this really vexing problem is the incredible thoughtfulness of the people in the room, but particularly the speakers both before and after lunch. So could you help me give them a round of applause?